Okay, so now we're moving on to the second set of presentations. And if in fact in the first panel we actually got an overview basically by decade, a presentation from the 80s, then we went to the new millennium, then we went back to the 90s. I think this next set of presentations will actually will involve the last three recipients. For one, this is work that I think Ron has not seen before, because they have not made their official presentation, which this presentation does not excuse them of. This is right, yes, exactly. So this is work in progress in all three cases. And you will see that in the last recent years, given sort of changes sort of through the internet, through sort of social media, through certain facility with travel, a lot of the proposals have become much more focused within a particular line of research that then involves a very strong and a very important travel component. And I think that that's something that'll be very clear within the three presentations. I think it's also coincidental but important to note that the three presenters developed their topics based either on their thesis or on a research having done here, sort of framing a particular line of investigation that then unfolded in a particular trip. So we will begin with Loretta Castro Regatta. Loretta studied architecture at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México and at the Academy of Architecture of Mendrisio in Switzerland under the guidance of Peter Zumthor. Loretta worked for HKS Architects in Mexico City from 2004 to 2006 and then became a freelance architect until 2008. She later specialized in urban design with a master's at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, which she received with distinction. And in 2010, together with Jose Pablo Ambrosi, she opened Taller Capital, a design studio dedicated to architecture and urban design in Mexico City. We are pleased to have Loretta come speak today about her investigation on issues of water management. Welcome, Loretta.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Felipe, thank you, Ron, for organizing this event. For me, it's a very big pleasure to be here at the GSD and presenting this work in progress. And as it is a work in progress, and it's really linked to my professional development, I'm gonna mix both things, starting with the trips, which I have already finished, not processed, but they are there, latent, and then with what has been the outcome of these trips. So the Druker Prize starts in, next please. Do I have to, where?
Okay, I forgot.
Sorry.
But I don't know which one. I think it's this one. Forward, backwards.
Okay.
Pointer.
Okay.
There we go.
Great. Okay, thank you. So for me, the Druker Prize started examining Mexico City, which is my own city. And it became the topic of my thesis because Mexico City, as you can see, a city of stone and squares, hard squares, was once a city of water. This is the first map of the city made by Hernán Cortés. And it shows a city in the center of a lake formed by land moving. It looked like this once. And today it still looks sometimes as a city in the middle of a lake, no? Even though it's unintentional, the city has been flooding for centuries. And even though each year or each certain amount of years, there is a very important infrastructure built in order to manage these floods, these tubes and pipes somehow never work. So because of this kind of trouble, I started researching here at the GSD the topic of how to control urban floods in Mexico City. And it later became the topic of my Druker Prize proposal, which is Urban Floods, Learning from Cities in Lowlands. So this is the underlying purpose. Guiding this proposal is the application of worldwide urban flood control strategies to the ongoing research I have been doing on flood mitigation in Mexico City. with 4 key points which I've been focusing on during my trips. First, the geographical position of the city, then the cultural understanding and the historical period in which cities were built and trying to mitigate floods, the hydraulic infrastructure and urban form, and the kind of water-based development. And this shows my travel itinerary somehow. I didn't just take one plane ticket. Instead, I took like 7 different trips, always returning to Mexico City in between. But this is the chronological order in which I made the trips, first to Latin America, then to Europe, later to India and Bangladesh, and the last trip was to China. And what I think was really interesting was going always back to Mexico City and having the chance to compare each of the cities visited to what was happening in Mexico. So the first 2 set of cities are Curitiba first, and then Porto Alegre. These diagrams were developed here at the GSD, and they show in red where does water lie in the city. Curitiba has this very big water venue, which is the Iguazu River. And it also has an interesting way of managing water inside the city. And this is one of the ways they do. It's a small canal. It's just like in the center of any given street. It happens several times around the city. But they always give this area for the canal to grow and somehow manage when there's a lot of water coming. And then this very big area, which is the Iguazu Park, and the Iguazu Canal particularly, which makes a border between the inner city of Curitiba, which you cannot see here, but it does, and then the outer skirts. And it helps making a difference, and it stops urbanization and unordered growth. Here in Curitiba, I met with Joel Goldenfum, which is in the Ministry of Water, dictating the policies for controlling all these soft infrastructures. I later went on the same trip to Porto Alegre. Porto Alegre is in the center of the Bahia de Guaíba, just here. And it suffers from a lot of floods because the Bahia is it's the delta of a big river. So whenever it rains, the lake rises its level and water usually floods the city. So they built a lot of infrastructures there based on pipes and tubes. They even built a dike, which was even worse because when the water level rised, water would come into the city and then it would never go out. So they started thinking what could be done about it. And they designed this Plano Director de Esgotos, which is policy for controlling rainwater specifically. And this was designed by Dr. Carlos Tucci and all of his students. This man, which we interviewed in Porto Alegre, works at the university and educated a large amount of people that have been working on how to control floods in all the south of Brazil, having a very good set of results, first with the plan and then with small acupuncture measures around the city for retaining water and liberating it slowly and managing wells inside of large developments and so on. The picture here shows the old pump house. So you can imagine the amount of water that got into the city to have this infrastructure only for pumping it out of the dike. The third city is Dordrecht in the Netherlands, lying in the delta of the Rhine River. And as many of you know, it's the most infrastructuralized city in the world regarding water management. So it was an icon. Even though there's a lot of money put into this city in order to manage water, and which is not the case for many of Latin American or Asian cities, the measures they take into consideration are really important to be understood and to see which of them could be applied and which couldn't. So this picture shows the main dike of Dordrecht and the inner city that's protected by it. And then the visit to the UNESCO Institute for Water Education and an interview I did to Barry Gersonius, who is the one who is right now in charge of designing policies and designing infrastructures to control floods for 1,000 years in Dordrecht. No? So you can imagine the difference, for example, with Mexico City, where we have a flood a year, and in Dordrecht they are planning to control it for 1,000 years. Then we traveled to Venezia, which obviously is a city that has to be known whenever you talk about flood control or managing floods in cities. In the center of the Venice Lagoon lies Venice. And Venice has so many things regarding water that are really interesting. First, these man-made and like vernacular infrastructures, like these platform systems, that whenever they have the acque alte, they just place them all along the city and people can walk through the city without getting wet on top of these platforms, and they are just lying there the whole year for immediate use whenever they're needed. We also found these floodgates almost in every single doorstep, which also indicate more or less the level to which water rises, which is around 70 centimeters. But then we went to visit the construction site for the Mose project, which I don't know if you've heard about, but it's an enormous infrastructure which will be placed in the Lido, just where there's a border between the Venice Lagoon and the Adriatic Ocean. And these enormous constructions are going to be lying under the sea, holding a very big steel gate that will have air pumped inside and will make it rise whenever there is a rise in the level of the sea. I will explain that in much more detail in my next presentation. It's a lot of time needed to do that. But what's impressive is the size of this. Now, when we were walking along the Lido, I knew where the place we wanted to go was. And when we saw these enormous grooves and these things, we thought they were hotels. We thought it was like a development or something. And we got closer and understood it was just a concrete mass that was going to be under the sea, no? Holding these platforms. And then we also found the Vere da Pozzo that I'm sure anyone going to Venice has seen. And what's really interesting of this is that Venice was built in order to catch water, to catch rainwater. That's why Venice is all made of stone. And underneath each and every of Venice's squares, there's a cistern that holds all the water, all rainwater, and that is later taken out through these openings. So even though it's not used now anymore, this talks about how urban design and how the structure of the city was all made in order to catch water and to use sweet water in a place where there is none. No? So later we moved to India, to Hyderabad. Hyderabad is not a city where you see water everywhere. It's the other way around. It's more like a desert place. But throughout history, and with the different nizams, there were a lot of ponds and water catchment places built, more or less 800. And during the years, mainly during the last century, these ponds have started to become urbanized as the population has grown. And this effect has caused a lot of urban floods in what were the former ponds. So the interest here was to see how through later urban design, these ponds have been started to recover, and they have started building a lot of public spaces from these ponds, recovering their use. So the first one we visited, and this is a cistern. It's in the old fort of Hyderabad. And you can see this kind of constructions, these cisterns, all around the city. And this is what those ponds that were urbanized have become. No? This is the Sarur Nagar Lake, which was urbanized in this style inside some years ago. And today, the Hyderabad Development Authority has started turning these areas into fantastic parks. They are gated parks, but they are really good venues where people around that are most of the time like poor areas of the city have the chance to visit. Then we went to Dhaka, thinking that there was flood control, and we discovered that there was none. I mean, Dhaka is a city in the middle of a river. There's a lot of water flowing all around, and Louis Kahn understood it very well. But the truth and the reality is this, no? The Buriganga River is the main stream or the main transportation venue in the city. It's used to connect the suburbs with the main city, and it's a really lively place where everything happens, no? We have this kind of housing of squatter settlements, everyone going through it. This is like the taxi, and this is the dike that was built around the city in order to protect it from floods once again, happening a very similar thing to what happened in Porto Alegre, but here it's completely uncontrolled. The dike is really big, and whenever water goes into the dike, the enormous problem there is that there is not enough energy to turn on the pumps and pump out the water from the city. So this one, like, Dhaka is in desperate need for solutions regarding flood control. And the last city was Suzhou. Thank you. Yeah, better. Suzhou in China. And this is an example of how urban design, like millenary urban design, is still working. No, so Suzhou is a walled city, and it's in a site where there are thousands of canals. So it's in a lowland which has always flooded, but somehow water is disseminated through this enormous net of canals. Still working, as you can see. And here we visited Dr. Kong Jianyu and his park in Shanghai as an example of what can be done in lowlands and how wetlands are a really important element through which water can be cleaned and how water can be used and soft infrastructures can become very helpful. So I did this diagram comparing the 7 cities, which ones flood, which ones doesn't. And what I learned was that the importance of introducing water culture in citizens is the main thing one has to do in order to be able to control floods in cities. The strength of water management policies, as the one in Porto Alegre, the viability of soft hydric infrastructures in the city, and the value of urban design regarding flood control and how important it is. So as an outcome of the Druker Prize and of what I've been doing for the last 2 years almost, I have this set of research programs in which I've been involved. First with Centro Mario Molina, doing this evaluation of water systems and proposals for water management in Mexico City. Because Mexico City, this is the basin of Mexico, and this is the system of lakes that was embedded in. And today we have none of these lakes. And what we're looking forward is to recover some of those and start building soft infrastructures in order to help control floods and manage water. And from that project, I started this Taller Hídrico, which is a studio in the university, in the National Autonomous University in Mexico, where we are working on strategies for controlling floods, controlling urban growth, and managing the water system of the city. We've been working in the south of the basin in these three main parts. The first one is Tlaltenco, which will be a hydrocultural infrastructure to show the importance of all the Chinampa area of the south, of Xochimilco, and what's still there. Then the lake Jicotláhuac, that, as you can see here, is a very important connection with a populated area of the city and the west. And the last is the town of Mixquic, which is a traditional town right now, which has still a lot of agriculture in Chinampas, but is slowly getting lost. And we're trying to find strategies for recovering urban agriculture there. And we're also working together with Dr. Manuel Perlot on the Delegación Iztapalapa on water strategies for conserving water and controlling floods. Thank you so much.
Loretta, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. And now our next presenter is the 2011 recipient of the Druker Prize, Victor Muñoz Sanz, who is a designer currently based in Madrid. His work aims to be heterogeneous and sometimes peripheral to architecture, blurring boundaries between research, architecture, urban design, cultural agency, graphic design, and communication. In 2006, he received an architecture degree from the School of Architecture of Madrid, and in 2011, a Master's of Architecture in Urban Design with distinction from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Currently, Victor is a PhD candidate in the Department of Architectural Design of the School of Architecture in Madrid, with his Druker research, the foundation of his with the Druker research being the foundation of his dissertation topic. So let's welcome Victor, who will be talking to us about network utopias and the Thomas Vata company towns. Welcome, Victor.
So this will work? Well, first, thanks everybody to the department, to Rahul, to Felipe, to the dean, and to Ron Druker for being here, for inviting me. And it's always very nice to come here and see so many familiar faces, and also to have the chance of meeting other former Druker fellows. And also, I'm very glad to be presenting in this occasion because I am the 25th recipient of the fellowship, so that's kind of a special number. My current research, which is a continuation of my work here at GSD and in the South America project with Professor Correa, revolves about the belief that it is necessary to look at other urbanisms, in particular, those emerging out of control in remote places as a consequence of the dynamics of development, industrialization, and the surplus of capital. It has become more crucial than ever for the design disciplines to actively engage and conceptualize alternative and sustainable futures for decentralized geographies and unbound territories. In my view, achieving that goal requires looking at precedents to construct a critical inventory of the diverse models of urbanism that industrial and resource extraction undertakings have generated, and then single out the main principles that have structured them. This synthesis can serve as the backbone for renewed models of urbanization. My project with the Druker Traveler Fellowship looks at one of these precedents, the urban legacy of the Bata Shoe Company. In my presentation, first I will do a historical introduction to the Bata Shoe Company, to then explain the specific aims of my investigation and how some of the research questions are starting to be answered by some of my observations during my field trips. Afterwards, I will present the case of Batanagar, the Bata town in India, as these towns embodies most of the issues I'm studying, And finally, we'll conclude with some reflections about my traveling so far. Thomas Bata was a Czech shoemaker from a town named Zlín that, contrary to what one can expect, the story of his transformation from a traditional shoemaker into the leader of a global company began not very far from here in Lynn, in north of Boston. After working and living there for some years in the 1910s, he embraced Taylorism, scientific management, and Fordism. He was very captivated by the modern spaces of production, by the machinery, and by the possibility of having natural light and ventilation. And it was in Lynn, in the site of this parking lot you can see here, where he established the first international branch of his company. Back in Europe, it was the crisis after the World War I that would lead him to the hybridization of the American productivist thought with an utopian socialist sensibility to the problems of urbanization related to industrialization. The foundation of his strategy was the Bata system of management, based in mass production in a series of competing self-managed workshops, in which corporate divisions and individuals were accountable for all aspects of the production and profit, giving bonuses to the most productive workshops. To remain competitive in the economic landscape after the war, he took a very aggressive move and decided to cut the prices of his products by 50%, but also cut the wages of the workers 40%. But most importantly, to compensate for the low wages, the company provided his workers with housing and all sorts of commodities. The spectacular growth of the company transformed Zlín into a total environment where new spatial and organizational ideas were experimented. Bata not only promoted the construction of factories and residences, but also the development of the cultural, educational, and social aspects of the city. Bata also took advantage of the geopolitical situation after the depression of the 30s. The system experimented in Zlín was intensively replicated all over Europe and beyond. By doing so, the enterprise would find a way of investing its surplus of capital and expanding the operations globally. At the same time, its structure would continue decentralizing and becoming more resilient to the economic instability and increasing custom barriers. The cities were based on variations of an ideal industrial town and used the same building typologies. They were divided in functional zones: the residential, the civic, the industrial, and the recreational. But more importantly, the ideal plans include variations for different geographies and climatic needs. Each city was to be one of an interconnected network of cities. The towns were near rivers, roads, and rail lines, with access to telephone and telegraph, ensuring the connectivity to the global network of production and distribution. The Bata Shoe Company used the agency of high modern planning as the way to achieve more efficient working and living conditions, aiming for an image of modernity that went beyond economic considerations and leading to the formulation of an aesthetic based on order and efficiency. The result of this process was an intricate combination of the interests of the company with a sense of responsibility for the strategic development of the regions where the towns were located. 80 years after that, my research is documenting systematically those towns by both field trips and the review of archival material. By comparing both conditions, I expect to unveil the mechanisms of adaptation of the original utopian vision to multiple geographies. The outcome will be a comprehensive evaluation of the evolution and legacy of this undertaking. In my view, this critical evaluation could allow to establish new criteria to conceptualize new contemporary utopias, able to actively engage design and achieve a sustainable relationship between economy, urbanism, and quality of life. Probably the first research question is to find out whether there are persistent and differentiating elements in the architecture, landscape, and urban design of the towns. For instance, in all of the housing colonies, the abstraction of a grid with a module of 20 by 20 feet that is taken from the industrial buildings in New England defines the factories, but also the organization of the housing and other buildings. The grid becomes a field condition that is exported globally, The checkerboard pattern that was used to organize the buildings on the grid allowed for the occupation of this generic field in a systematic and homogeneous manner. Another question deals with finding out which were the adaptation strategies, formal and informal, of the ideal towns and typologies to different cultures and geographies. On the one hand, it is interesting to take a look and reflect on the internal politics of what is kept, discarded, and modified in these towns. In the revolution, the towns have developed specific spatial and aesthetic features, taking distance from a system which was replicated globally, but which existence calls their own. On the other, in spite of the persistent modularity, the buildings have adapted depending on the climatic conditions and the availability of construction materials, and their height, their roof, their chromatism, and materiality changes from one to the other. The Bata factory in Ottawa, Canada, was raised to the image and likeness of the other factories in Europe. Huge clear glass windows allow maximum transparency, sunlight, and visual connection with the environment. However, that solution was as desirable as problematic in terms of thermal efficiency and operating expenses in the extreme Canadian winter. Therefore, the openings were downsized by wrapping the building with an insulating panel system. Finally, probably one of the most relevant questions has to do with the state of the architectural and urban heritage, and to know whether the towns have engendered other urbanisms, architectures, and programs, and why. In some of the places I have been, the contemplation of decay inevitably causes nostalgia. However, on the other hand, this destiny is totally consistent to the Bata creed. Thomas Bata's position to architecture was ahistorical and embraced continuous transformation and adaptation to new conditions. And he criticized the opposite, as we can read in his autobiography. I quote now, "We still build our houses so as to last 500 years and inconvenience the future generations in the same way as the houses built by our ancestors put us in difficulties." Sometimes, failure has to do with Bata's architecture functional specificity. Its standardized methods of construction achieve materials that were thought for quick deployment and immediate use, not really for lasting. In addition, the rigidity and self-containment of the ideal urban form on which they were based generally has not allowed for its replication in a self-sustained manner. Sometimes, it's just that ideologically the towns stop making sense. Here we can see the case of Belcamp in the Bata town near Baltimore, which was demolished and transformed into a corporate campus and a gated community. Being the only remain, the logo, which you can see there somewhere, the logo that used to be on the water tower of the factory. The paternalism behind the urban and community concept of Bata entered in conflict with a society that was liberal and democratic. Sometimes there is a strong pride and feeling of community that keeps the town alive in spite of the end of activity of the factory. In Ottawa, Canada, the factory workers, looking for new ways of recreation, cleared part of a hill overlooking the town and transformed it into a ski hill. The hard work and determination of these people was an act of community building that went beyond the life of the factory, and that today is the main attraction, social center, and economic engine of Ottawa. To illustrate in a more detailed and specific way these issues, I will present one case that embodies at some levels all these questions. This is Batanagar, the Bata town in India. The records say that Thomas Bata made of his business strategy in India a heroic task after the deep impression of seeing a barefoot rickshawala with a wound on his tooth in Kolkata. Bata realized then that India was a huge market of barefoot masses, and not just a source of raw materials for his factories in Czechoslovakia. India was a perfect breeding ground for a high modern utopia such as Bata's. Colonial regimes were systems where welfare colonialism and authoritarian power encouraged experiments to remake native societies through social engineering. Bata's mission acquired here a new dimension. It was the task of his company to provide all those millions of barefoot people with cheap shoes, and for that, Bata had to completely transform a caste-based system of production and retail, as well as to improve the living conditions of the shoemakers. The site chosen for the establishment of Batanagar was on a flatable plain in one of the many meanders of the Huli River. Although it was relatively well connected by water, rail, and road to Kolkata, the site was not exactly a suitable place to build the ambitious program planned by the company. Half of the site was flooded during high tide, and the other half was an abandoned brick field full of snakes. The architect in charge of the design of Batanagar proposed at first to build just on the dry areas of the land, avoiding all ponds and pits. However, his master plan seemed irrational and unorganized, far from the streamlined ideals of Bata urbanism. Not surprisingly, Jan Bata, the president of the company after Thomas Bata's death in 1932, rejected the layout. If there are pits on your way, fill them up, he urged the architect, as he drew straight lines of the plan. And if we compare the final plan, which we can see here, with the ideal industrial town in its tropical version, we can see that the obsession of the Batas with the use of ideal plans was totally real. The task of leveling the land was gigantic, since at some points the difference in height was of 37 feet. Still, water was very superficial, so deep foundations and water pumps were needed to raise the factories and living colonies, and this way finalizing the subjection of a backward social and natural landscape to the forces of modern man. The plans for the living colonies differed to the ones in Slin and adapted to a new tropical condition. The managers, mainly Czechs, lived segregated in a colony of early modern European-style villas and apartment buildings with their own social facilities. Indians lived in more radical and abstract communal buildings placed on a neutral green field, following the characteristic checkerboard pattern. A dustless environment, schools, hospitals, a sports club, library, cinema, a public health department, and an extensive network of water, sewage, and electrical infrastructure allow maintaining the conditions necessary for happy, healthy, and clean living that Bata workers needed to be productive. Batanagar master plan was completed and brought to Nanji, the neighboring village, new life and opportunities. Markets multiplied by more than 5, and more houses were built. Workers and the people in Nanji forged a dynamic relationship of interdependence and coexistence. With the time, the green fields and playgrounds became an inclusive ground on which different worlds simultaneously overlapped. During festival time, stages, fanfares, and other ephemeral infrastructure transformed Batanagar. Nanji village is denser, and its markets have grown along the main roads across Batanagar, but its edges and neutral open spaces, understood as a shared elastic space, have been fully respected. Batanagar's landscape, in its abstraction and neutrality, allow for a mutual and respectful coexistence. However, in 1999, the Bata management decided that the operating expenses of Batanagar were unacceptable for the company, and decided to redevelop the site as an integrated new town named Calcutta Riverside. Riverside has the typical elements of an upscale development in Asia: high-rise condominiums, villas, golf course, shopping mall, convention center, hospital, school, a riverfront walk, all for a population of 30,000. In Riverside, the built form is organized along the structuring axis of all Batanagar, since the steel, electrical, water, and sanitation infrastructure runs below those roads. Furthermore, its design is heavily determined by the existing nature, transformed nature. Environmental laws in Kolkata enforce the conservation or transplantation of trees on site and the preservation in area of the current water bodies. The project keeps the Bata factory in operation, and all Bata employees are housed free of cost on site. Contestation with existing and surrounding population is prevented with the relocation of street vendors, the provision and access to some public space for community use and festivals, and the preservation of the Bata schools and temples. Batanagar is now a construction site, with the concrete skeletons of high-end towers and villas rising over the old modern structures. Economy and regulations will keep the basic structure of one side of the high modern agenda behind Batanagar, the man-made industrial landscape that fully transformed the original deltaic ecosystem in the name of modernity. On the other hand, and in spite of the clear value as part of the same global historical phenomenon, the architectures of the living colonies will not be preserved at all. When I was about to begin my trips, I was very curious to know how it would be to travel to the same town over and over. But apart from the fascination of seeing the variations of the same building typologies and plans, I have discovered that the towns acquire a different dimension and become fully legible thanks to the people I have met and the stories they have shared with me. They all have in common the conviction that they live in places that belong to a larger system and that share a common history that is worth telling. People like Fabio, a Brazilian architect I met in Batatuba in Sao Paulo. Here he's showing us that Batatuba is the unexpected place where Jan Bata is buried. He's actively advocating for the listing as heritage of the township, and in the meantime is collecting all sorts of materials to keep the memory of the place alive. Also people like Serge and Shirley in Batawa. Serge came to Batawa from Helaucourt, France, which is also known as Bataville. He had worked for the company since he was 15, and he was offered to go abroad and work in the brand new factory in Canada for 3 years. There he met this woman who would become his wife. It was very convenient to live there. The company supplied with housing and utilities, the community feeling was strong, and work was walking distance to home. Serge never came back to France, and talking to him about the history and his impressions on the company at the time was a fantastic experience. Finally, I had the chance to meet Sonia Bata. This 85-year-old woman is the daughter-in-law of Thomas Bata, and I met her in Toronto and Batawa, and then in Merlin in Switzerland. She took me to the archives of her museum and collected herself, as you can see here, all sorts of materials that could be interesting for my work. And then we spent the whole afternoon having a conversation about the history of the company. The next day, after reading and reviewing the research proposal I presented for the Druker Fellowship, she shared with me the 3 big visions of Thomas Bata that, according to her, were behind the idea of making cities. First, to consider people as the main asset of the company. Second, to believe in change and progress. And third, to respect the individual. The Bata Cities concept reunited these 3 ideas. And when Bata saw that it worked in Slim and people's life became easier and more comfortable, he just decided to multiply the whole concept over and over again. Because he was sure that a happy man works much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. That was quite fantastic, quite a fantastic presentation. And last but not least, we have our last presenter, who is also the most recent Druker recipient. So he's been working on a fast track and intensely just since last May. Carlos Garcia Vélez Alfaro is a Mexican architect and urbanist. His research and design work departs from a transcalar approach to design that spans from fashion design and interior furnishings to urban landscapes and open territories. In 2012, before establishing his own practice, Carlos worked for a diverse group for diverse design studios, including Gabellini Shepard Associates in New York City and the Alexander McQueen Fashion House in London. He holds a BFA and a BArch from the Rhode Island School of Design and a Master's of Architecture in Urban Design with distinction from the GSD, where he is this year the Druker Fellow and also a teaching associate in the Department of Urban Planning and Design. Let's welcome Carlos and his talk on Form and Pedagogy, the 20th Century University City Atlas in Latin America.
Hi, good afternoon. It's great to be here. I wanted to thank, first of all, Mr. Druker. I just met him. And of course, Raul, Felipe, and Mosen. So my traveling fellowship project is titled Form and Pedagogy, an atlas, a 20th century, former Puerto Alegre, the 20th century university city in Latin America. Of the 20th century large-scale urban interventions inscribed into the Latin American city, the university campus is the most salient symbol of progress. The academy became an epicenter of 20th century architecture and urban experimentation and a unique urban development within major Latin American cities. The project examines the urban and architectural structure and legacy of the principal Latin American campuses built over the past 60 years. Furthermore, the project traces the continental and transcontinental design influences that shape these grounds and map their spatial evolution. Finally, it explores the relevance of the autonomous university campus as an urban development pole in the city. The massive urban expansion that occurred in major Latin American cities in the post-war era created a widespread impetus for a new learning environment. Several Latin American nations that viewed education as an emblem of progress and civility established university cities. This trend drew influential architects and planners, creating synergies between schools of architecture, planning, national and international architects, and visual artists to cut across political boundaries and create a network that ties a Pan-American project. So first I'm going to talk about Mexico. The UNAM Ciudad Universitaria is the biggest and most important university campus in Mexico. The main legacy of the campus is the design synergy that occurred from a collective approach where architects, artists, and politicians came together to assemble a national project. The university city idea originated in 1928 as a thesis proposed by Mauricio M. Campos and Marcial Gutiérrez Camarena. Idea of a new university campus remained latent until 1940, when guided by President Miguel Alemán, the Mexican federal government made the university city a project of national significance. The university became a new pole of urban development, expanding the city to the south. The design began in 1943 through UNAM's Faculty of Architecture as they held an internal design competition to design the master plan of the new university city, where Mario Pani and Enrique del Moral were the winners, and commissioned the other faculty members to design the individual campus buildings. As the master planners, Mario Pani and Enrique del Moral directed a seamlessly stitched together the individual campus buildings, becoming the overall curators of the university city. Carlos Lasso, who administered the construction, was able to complete the entire project in only 3 years. So these are the two images that I was able to find from archives that actually, from the flying helicopter, took them this is 2 years, so it was a year after that it was actually completed. So within the influences that generated the campus, the form of the project originates from Le Corbusier's heavy influence on Pani. The actual influence of Rio campus is clearly visible in the organization of UNAM, not only from Le Corbusier's proposal, but through Marcelo Piacentini's proposal for the Rio University City. A clear example is through the stadium. I should use this here, there. Yeah. Hold on, I just got lost. Yeah, not only through the stadium, where it was left on the other side of the infrastructure, a recreational amenity to the city. Today, that stadium is what we know as the Maracaná Stadium. And it was the only part built from the proposal, and it's the same way that we can see to the left, the same approach by Mario Pani and Del Moral, with the same infrastructure dividing the campus, giving this as a public amenity to the city. The unifying mobility strategy was driven by the Henrey system, a system of one-way lanes that never cross each other but submerge or elevate to never create an intersection. And this is the model that was first used in UNAM. The entire UNAM University City project was marked by a synergy between national Mexican architects such as Mario Pani, Juan O'Gorman, famous Mexican muralists such as Siqueiros and Diego Rivera, and Mexican government officials, keeping the UNAM University City deliberately as a national project. As such, it became a national symbol for Mexico and kept continuity with its historic past. Today, the University City is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's recognized as the most important university city in Latin America. I move to Puerto Rico. Campus Rio Piedras, which was founded in 1903 And in 1924, the US architecture firm Bennett Parsons and Frost was commissioned to design a Jeffersonian-inspired symmetrical axial plan, today known as the Parsons Plan. Then, following World War II, the university experienced its greatest transformations through Jaime Benítez, the chancellor and later president of the Universidad de Puerto Rico. He hired architect Henry Klum to design and expand the campus. Klum, who was born in Germany, moved to the United States in 1929 to assist Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin North. Klum then moved to Puerto Rico in 1933. His approach to the university campus design was informed by his personal interest in the integration of tropical conditions with the organic disposition of interior and exterior space. In 1952, Klum proposed a 20-year master plan for the Universidad de Puerto Rico. It was a radical shift from the Parsons Plan. It rejected traditional Spanish and Anglo-Saxon campus design because in Klum's view, neither were of the tropics nor in Puerto Rico's origin or future. Klum's plan changed the campus axial angles and pushed them away from the orthogonal scheme. This change is very important as it marks a change of paradigm and allows a new form of modernity into Puerto Rico. He uses the student center as the central point of the campus axis to give the best sun exposure to the buildings. This derives from Frank Lloyd Wright's St. Mark's Towers, where he rotates the tower to accomplish the same goal. Klum adapts this architecture strategy and adapts it to its urban scale. So here we can see the shift. So as a result, the Universidad de Puerto Rico Recinto de Piedras has become a model laboratory of modern regional architecture in the tropics. I'm going to, one second. So the next is the Ciudad Universitaria de Caracas. It was designed by one architect, Carlos Raúl Villanueva. The university city was able to make a national project an international collaboration of artists, where the architecture is deeply intertwined with art, creating a symbiotic composition. Within many of the influences over the form of the campus, Villanueva traveled to Colombia's Ciudad Universitaria de Bogotá to absorb the attributes of the already partially built campus, and determines the best design criteria for the Ciudad Universitaria de Caracas, where its urban design is divided directly from the pedagogical diagrams of Fritz Carlsen. Here we can see on the top Fritz Carlsen's pedagogical diagrams, and on the bottom left the result of the diagrams on the design of the university city of Bogotá. And to the right, we can see the very clear influence of Villanueva's proposal. Following the trip, it was concluded that one architect and one master planner would develop and oversee the design of the entire university city, a recurring theme in many Latin American campuses. Villanueva began to work on the new campus in 1943. With an approach born from his studies at the École des Beaux-Arts, his first plan featured a central axis that radiated from the medical area and served as the core of the entire complex. In 1946, after construction was all underway on the central axis plan, Villanueva abandoned it in favor of an opposing organic cultural plan. Villanueva moves into an organicist model, where he's influenced by writings by Bruno Sevit, where Frank Lloyd Wright's work is a center study. It is here where we see the influence in the shaded walkways that tie the campus together. So this is the Venezuela campus, and this is in Florida Southern College, which I went to both. And this is actually the Frank Lloyd Wright campus. It's the place that has the most Frank Lloyd Wright buildings in the world. So it has more than 10 buildings. So he invites famous artists such as sculptors Alexander Calder and Joan Arp, and muralists Mateo Manaur and Victor Basarelli to collaborate on the Centro Directivo Cultural, which includes, among other structures, the Cover Plaza, the Aula Magna Auditorium, and the Central Library. The Cultural Center then became the campus' new hub, connecting all the systems that form the university city. Through the project, Villanueva placed Venezuela on the International Modern Architecture map, and like UNAM, UNESCO declared the university city a World Heritage Site in 2000. So I'm going to go through Brazil through two universities. When Gustavo Capanema was named Brazil's first Minister of Education and Health, In 1935, the development of the university city in Rio de Janeiro became his greatest undertaking. He looked abroad from an advisory committee and hired, in succession, Italian architect Marcello Piacentini, Le Corbusier, and Lucio Costa to create the 3 consecutive master plans that first proposed the site on the Ursa Peninsula. In 1948, the site was moved to an artificial landfill island in Guanabana Bay. Here, we can see the landfill process through the years of construction. That's today. Although Piacentini's and Le Corbusier's and Costa's proposal were not executed, they heavily influenced the master plan later developed for the Ciudad Universitaria de Brasilia. So these are a couple of projects that we can see, of architecture from that I took from the archives. These buildings actually half demolished now. And so this is the original pictures. So then, the Universidad de Brasilia. The Universidad de Brasilia originated as an integral part of the competition to design the pilot plant of Brasilia. Launched just as the Ministry of Education and Health building had been concluded, the University City of Rio de Janeiro was being built. It is in the year 1957 when Brazilian President Juscelino Kubitschek named Costa the winner of the Brazilian Master Plan competition, and as part of the commission, commissioned Costa to design the new university city. The Universidad de Brasilia was designed as an integral neighborhood of the city. The master plan was designed in 1960 by Lucio Costa with architecture by Oscar Niemeyer. The design process for the university originates back to 1938, as Lucio Costa had gone through a previous design project that we just saw for the Ciudad Universitaria de Rio that was a foundation for much of the work done in Brasilia. Through its architecture, Niemeyer used the university city as a laboratory for new and different systems of prefab construction, an experiment that had an important role through the construction of all of Brasilia. The construction of the university city halted in 1964 in response to a military coup, which forced most of the faculty and Niemeyer to leave the university city. In 1968, the School of Architecture and Urbanism ushered in the next phase of construction, taking the university city through 3 phases that materialized in 3 different architectural languages: modernism, brutalism, and the third was able to become its own by an integrating of both influences. It's the last one. Universidad de Tucumán, which is in la Sierra de San Javier in Argentina. The project of the Ciudad Universitaria de Tucumán originated from the transformations that occurred of the Universidad Nacional de Tucumán in 1945, which consolidated the university as an academic and cultural pole for the north of Argentina. The transformation was brought through the government of Perón in 1946, where he made big structural changes that aimed for academic excellence. The first change in Tucumán was the creation of the university institutes, linking them with the needs of the region. In 1946, the Instituto de Arquitectura y Urbanismo is created by Arquitecto Eduardo Sacriste, Horacio Caminos, and Jorge Vivanco, who promote a link between modernity and the local academy. The motto was project, design, and build, having the central point in the school to be the studios. In 1947, Jorge Vivanco travels to Europe and recruits professionals to consolidate the school. It is at this time, as it happened in the rest of Latin America, the exile of many Europeans would find a home in Latin America. It is through this method that the Italian architects Ernesto Nathan Rogers, Sino Calperina, and Enrico Tedeschi, among others, arrived to Tucumán. It was an intellectual transformation that occurred in the fields of theory, architecture, and urbanism. It is at this time, and as part of the project being executed by the professors and students, that the project of the Ciudad Universitaria comes to play. The design for a new campus was decided to be on top of the Sierra de San Javier, led by Horacio Caminos and a group of professors from within the school, with structural design by Pierre-Louis Nervi. The campus was conceived as a series of super slabs that would break a natural landscape. It is in 1952 by Perón made changes that brought political and economical distress to Argentina. When Rector Horacio Descole steps down, the institute dissolves and the majority of its faculty resigns and moves away. With this change, the Ciudad Universitaria de la Sierra de San Javier lost funding on the project and was abandoned halfway through construction. Until today, the project remains abandoned with only a partially built dormitory building as witness to the experiment. It now has become a symbol of abandoned modernism in the mountains of Argentina. If in fact each project was constructed independently, communication within the architecture community defined the university city as a de facto Pan-American project, opening up multiple dialogues among designers. One of the main platforms for discussion were the Congresos Panamericanos de Arquitectura, primarily the four listed here. Other forms of exchange also happened through the travel and informal conversation among colleagues. It is in 1955's Henry Russell Hitchcock's MoMA exhibit, Latin American Architecture since 1945, that it becomes the main venue that introduces the university cities in Latin America for a worldwide audience. As this work advances and becomes a publication and a traveling exhibition, visiting each of the campuses, this project raises three important observations. The creation of a synergy between disciplines, primarily art, architecture, and engineering, the establishment of a national, transnational, and transatlantic set of influences that form a project at a Pan-American scale, and that raises awareness about the cultural heritage of modernism in the Americas. As a closing comment, I would like to further extend my gratitude to Ron Druker, and thanks to the generosity of this grant, not only was I able to visit the campuses, but also create a network of architects and historians that have allowed me to raise the visibility for the urgent need for preservation funds and strategies that can help us conserve the most important examples of modernism in the Americas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another fantastic presentation. Now I'd like to ask the three presenters to come to the square table or rectangular table, and we'll begin the conversation. Okay. Well, that was, I think, an incredible set of presentations. And one of the things that struck me the most in relation to the previous presentations, if we actually look at the ones from the 80s, 90s, and 2000, photography became a very important instrument. Most of the photographs were extremely well sort of curated, and in a way, bringing those photographs back, many through slides, actually became sort of the way that you actually created a larger imaginary. So in a way, the purpose of the trip to a greater degree had to do with sort of documentation through photography, through documentation, through sketching. And one of the things that I was very impressed by the three presentations, but in particular by the last two, has to do with the role of the archive. The fact that many of the documents that we saw today can only be achieved if you travel. Like you find photographs of the campuses online, you find photographs of Bata online, but really the original archives, many of them are still within some of these original places and outside of the scope of the web. And I wonder if the three of you, because I think in your case there's a lot of sort of knowledge that happens, maybe not in archives, but within the specific know-hows of every city. I wonder if the three of you could actually speak a little bit about the value of the archive and local knowledge in relationship to the larger global context that we've looked at.
Well, in our case in particular, I think that meeting with the people in the cities was actually what made consistent the trips and what really made us realize if the strategies were working or not. For example, I think the most valuable person we talked to was Dr. Carlos Tucci in Brazil. He's an expert on the topic of urban flood control. He's an engineer, but he really knows all the little bit parts that work for water in Brazil and how to manage them. And even though I read a lot of essays before going to all these cities, what we learned in each and every one of these through talking to the people was very valuable and really made sense to, regarding what we were seeing.
Well, in my project, I mean, actually photography is, I think, quite important, although they didn't show everything, but the idea of documenting systematically the towns, like taking quick pictures to the same things all over and over, has a kind of this comparative process, is very important. But yeah, I mean, and some of the places, I mean, have never been photographed in such way. You can find some pictures on the internet. On some others, you just have the Google Earth image. There's nothing else. But really about the archive and the local knowledge is very important. For instance, the case on Brazil, I was telling, this architect, Fabio, he has found an old album in the abandoned factory, which had all the pictures of the 30s. And not even the company had them. And he's the one who has shared them with me. And also he's been taking pictures of the town and making drawings of the town. So that's the only way of meeting them is going there. And almost by chance, I found him by chance there. And because some other people told me, there's this architect who also is interested in the town, you should meet him. Because he's not like a PhD or a professor in a university. He's just a local architect in a small town in Sao Paulo. And the only way of beating him was like just going there.
In my case, I mean, the archives were crucial. Part of how I started the trip was through using Docomomo as a big help on a way to network and get to know the people that are crucial in the different places I went. So many of the archives wouldn't have been accessible at all if I wouldn't have been by that. And also, a lot of the archives are not even in the universities because they are all very much more privately owned by the architects or by other different archives that are not really linked to the university. So I guess most of the images that you guys saw, some of them come from the archives of the universities, but most of the other ones come from conversations and kind of it leads you from one thing to the next. If someone tells you an anecdote that links the campuses together, then I would move to know that the next visit I would take, I would know what to look in the next archive. So to me, it was very much linked, the fact of the network of the people I met with the archive.
Very good. No, I think that the issue of the archive and documentation was very, very clear in the three presentations. Maybe the next question, before we open up for conversation, is addressed to all three, but maybe more specifically to Loretta, which has to do with the way that the travel and research has become sort of a platform to begin to develop particular ways of working within the city. And maybe you can speak a little bit more about the relationship of the fellowship, what you learned, and how are you thinking on advancing that within sort of already quite exciting things that you're doing in Mexico City?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, it's been very important, and I really thank you, Ron, for the opportunity. Right now, most of the things I am doing are related to the Druker Prize and to the research I've been doing throughout this fellowship. And I think that the main point was that I chose something that's a real problem for the city and where there's a need to focus on. No, like managing water has been a problem always there, and it's always been left to engineers to solve it. And when you start looking at it from another approach and nourishing it with experiences from other countries and from ways of solving it in other parts, it really becomes an interesting topic and something that can have a lot of future, no? And what's been really nice is that with all this research, I went to the university and proposed to open a studio for doing projects related to water from the architecture, urban design, and landscape point of view. And it was very well received. And we opened what we call the Hydro-Urban Studio, which right now has been open for almost 2 years. And it started as an academic studio. And the first project well, the students and myself and another professor guided, is right now becoming a master plan for the southern part of the city with a very good chance of being built, we hope. And this is starting to happen in other places, because when they saw that we're working on that and we're proposing like soft infrastructures for the city in a different way, other governments within the city, like other delegaciones, are starting to ask us to design parts of the city in this way. So it's really been like a very good chance for us.
And I think along the similar lines, I think there's another sort of component of that question that is more addressed to Carlos and Victor, which has to do with the relevance of a particular sort of modernist heritage, and I think the role for sort of a certain degree of critical conservation of many of these spaces. I mean, one of the things that I think for me was fascinating on the presentation of the campuses has to do with the different states at which they actually are. I mean, if you actually look at sort of UNAM, it's perfectly maintained, but when you actually look, well, of course, Tucumán is Tucumán, but when you look at sort of Rio or Venezuela, I think there is a certain need to raise awareness about sort of the value of a lot of these of parts, certain parts of the campus or the totality of the campuses. And the same, I think, with Bata. There is, I think, there's certain parts and pieces that in many cases there's been lobbying for them to become World Heritage Sites and so on. And I wonder if you could expand how you see sort of your work through the fellowship advancing this agenda.
Well, yes, I mean, some of the towns I've visited, let's say Switzerland, the case is very clear. The town is very well protected and is in a perfect condition. Mm-hmm. And in India, we saw that it's derelict and abandoned. And I think that so far the towns have been studied, let's say, as independent pieces, not as a comprehensive research showing that it's a global network of cities. So I think that in terms of how this project could raise awareness is that once you make all the pieces together and show that they're part of the same system, all these local parts which are interested in the protection of those cities, of those towns, could have a stronger argument when they present that for a listing and a conservation of heritage.
In terms of the university cities, there is very clear that there's clearly two universities that are the most respected and protected by UNESCO, which is Venezuela and Mexico. But the rest are really in very bad shape. And I guess what I've learned the most by, again, this idea of meeting all these people and incredible historians who know so much already about those topics, that's why I thought the venue of putting together a book that brings together all these incredible historians and in link with an exhibition that will actually go back to each of the universities in Latin America and be linked with this publication that, thanks to everyone here that has helped, and the local historians, they have all kind of given texts and information that has been amazing, that is now being compiled to be a book. So in my own help, I mean, that's what I can give back in terms of awareness, and I think there is a larger dialogue of how to move it forward.
So it's this idea of the Pan-American project, seeing them all in a way under one publication or under one roof. Mm-hmm. Very good. I think with that we can actually maybe open it up to the audience. Any questions from the audience? Andrea? I think you're going to get a microphone soon. There we go.
I'm delighted to see Loretta and Victor's work that followed, because I remember seeing your proposals and being part of enabling you to do that. These were amazing examples of developing a research piece of research work and using the travel to enable that. In contrast to the earlier set, I'm struck by the kind of analytic nature of them, the forms of documentation, which are not hand drawings, for example, but more much more reliance on photographs, and generally speaking, advancing a specific research topic. What I really would like to know is, what were the surprises that you all found? What were the things that that were a question of discovery, real discovery, which is, I think, probably Ron's first purpose in generating this traveling fellowship. You all went to find specific pieces of information, but what did you find? What did you discover that you didn't anticipate?
For me, like, the biggest surprise was that Dhaka was completely wrong. I shouldn't have gone to Dhaka. It was supposed to be a city with a very interesting way of controlling floods, as it lies in this delta, and it has a very big amount of money put into the infrastructure done to control floods. But in the end, we realized that the city is flooding anyway, and it's even worse than before. No? So that was like the first thing. And also, obviously, apart from the trips to these cities, we visited many other places, like fantastic and amazing places in northern India. We went to Bhutan, we went to France, and to so many other places, which were very rich. And it for me, it's given like a completely new vision of the world. And the other thing is that I found out that the solutions in Asia or in Mexico sometimes are so similar, and that people approach the problem sometimes in very similar ways, and that's because it's like the nature of the human being to solve for subsistence and for living. No, I think that's what has been the surprise for me.
Well, in my case, probably, I mean, one thing that was probably the most surprising thing I found was that still the influence of the Bata Shoe Company into the life of the people in these towns 80 years after they were built is still very powerful. And also that still the company is family operated. It still is like the CEO is the niece of the owner, and still Sonia Bata is a very dominant woman. She still like decides what happens to those towns. And when you visit them and you talk to people, in all of them they share like this feeling of belonging to something, and that's something very like striking in a way, and that a pattern that keeps repeating all over the place. And sometimes they don't even know that they are Czechs, but they know that there's some other towns in other places, and that's something that creates an interesting tension about how these people try to find their own identity, while at the same time they know they belong to something that has been done somewhere else. So that's something quite interesting that is difficult to describe by pictures or drawings. So.
For me, the most surprising thing, I guess, is you plan ahead and you create a proposal and you think you'll follow a line. And I guess once you actually make the trip and you jump to all these places, things change. Everything changes. Your itinerary, which I think is the main thing, just becomes a mess, I guess. And because in terms of my specific project, it is all about the influences and the transformations that occurred across borders. So I think, to me, every time I would go to a place, the transformation that occurred in that place changed the trip that I was doing next and put me in new universities that I didn't even know existed. For example, I had no idea of the existence of the Frank Lloyd Wright campus. I mean, probably a lot of people knew, but I had no idea that it existed. And it was incredible because at the end, the relationship that I found from that direct influence to Villanueva or different types of things, that those to me were the fun surprises at the end. And they make everything worthwhile.
Yeah, something I wanted to mention is also that is to choose, the moment you choose to travel to each place, and let's say in the case of Canada, I specifically chose to go in winter because I knew that something had to affect the town. The fact that it's minus 16 degrees Celsius in winter, and how that affects the architecture. And that in India, I planned it because there was another trip to India, but then I realized that I would need to go back to see how the town is when it's the festivals, and see how it is transformed by other architectures. So that's something that you cannot plan, that you discover when you go there, and it implies more traveling. But that's what it's about.
I think Raul has a question.
No, I don't. I just want to pick up on what Andrea said, because it's important that she was, I think the commonality between the first generation or the first decade and this is that the ambitions in terms of expansiveness, intercontinental, it's incredibly similar. I mean, even Bill's drawing, which showed us going across the globe, was not dissimilar from any of these. I think, and this is related to the comments I made when we opened, I was referring to Ron about how we feel this responsibility now at the GSD with the corpus growing of how one can leverage this research in ways that it can help build an archive for us. And so one of the instruments that have been put into place, and Loretta just graduated when we started this, so she didn't benefit from it, but in discussion with Ron, is Victor and Carlos both were given the opportunity to stay on as research associates for the year after they graduate, which means that then the base for the travel fellowship yet is the GSD, which means they get mentorship from the department. It also allows us to begin to capture this as an archive, which we couldn't do earlier. And I think then therefore you can, the comments you're making about the analysis and the deliberateness of the research projects benefits from that cycle. And that's how we're hoping that we can build this urban design archive here at the GSD. So just wanted to.
Very good. I think Alex has a question. Over here, yeah.
Comment. First of all, I think we should, in retrospect, offer the other 24 people that opportunity. Wouldn't you agree? That'd be a good thing to do. But I'd like to suggest another commonality between the earlier ones and the other ones. There's been a sense about how different it was, and some are more analytical, and some are drawing, some are photographs. But Felipe, when you first asked your question about the archives, all three answered not about the archives, but about people that they met.
Right.
And of course, in the first group, there was the difficulty of travel and no internet, and you had to make contacts with individuals and all this. So oddly enough, while we think about this as a traveling fellowship, the Druker Traveling Fellowship, what has been a constant is actually the kind of the human connections that are being made, oftentimes actually much more important, or as important, not more important, as important as the actual places visited. And I think that's something that's been continuous over the 27 years, and I'm sure that would even make Ron particularly happy as well.
I think Ian.
Thanks. I'm going to, my question, I'm going not to try to impute too much of my own personal experiences by doing my Druker in 2003, but I'll make a quick comment to your issue about the internet, and that I did my Druker during the age of the internet, and I will concur that you really need on-the-ground connections with people, and having, in my case, I had a team that I sort of worked with and hired to help me, because otherwise I would end up in some very dangerous and difficult situations. I was even sort of semi-detained by somebody thinking I was a CIA operative because I was trying to look at some of their infrastructure relating to an Islamic Brotherhood in that town. But getting to the question for the three recent Druker Fellows, is that what I find interesting about your work, and the others that presented as well before, is that you're building up an arsenal of analytical inquiry. And that is very useful, whether it's defining a cultural landscape, historical context, et cetera, political ambitions, failed and successful and otherwise. I guess my question will focus on how are you received when you are presenting your method of inquiry to the non-design profession, to the outsiders, to when you're meeting Dr. Tucci and others. In his case, he's an engineer, so he's understands somewhat where you're coming from. But it's what I find interesting about the fellowship is you often might receive a pushback from non-designers or people not allied with our profession about what are you doing, what's the bigger context of and the meaning of what you're doing. And I think that's a very interesting. I'd be curious to know your responses because when we're in the school, we all kind of speak the same language and we all understand each other. But when we're trying to express our mandate to the outside world, sometimes there's pushback. And I'd be curious to hear some of your experiences about that, if that has occurred as of yet in your individual research.
Yeah. Well, in most of the times it was very well received. We were very lucky because people granted us a lot of time, like maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, each one of them. For example, we talked to Dr. Atik Rahman in Bangladesh, which happens to be an eminence in sustainability. I didn't know him, and it was almost by chance that we met with him. And he was really generous. He gave us papers and treated me almost as if I was doing a PhD and told me to write back and he would revise what I was writing and everything. That was really nice. But on the other hand, for example, in Hyderabad, we wanted to meet with a person you recommended, which was very nice. I talked to him by phone, but he never answered back, no? So he was like completely uninterested, and I wrote him some questions through an email, and he told me, oh, you should look at the webpage. So I was like, okay, you know? So sometimes they receive it very well, and in other cases they just don't really care, no? But I mean, in the end, you can go and see it, and that makes a lot of sense, and you also understand somehow how things work in the place and why you get sometimes attention and sometimes you don't. No?
In my case, most of the times the reaction is surprise. It's like, what is this Spanish Mexican architect being in this town taking pictures of us, all these buildings? We don't know why this is important. And then when you explain, they start like, understanding what you're trying to do. And also, in visiting these towns, there are a very small community, so I always try to like contact someone who is like sort of like representative of the community, so that you are not like a strange agent that goes there and just take pictures and leave. And even sometimes I am with someone, they look at you with certain suspicion, like, why are you taking pictures of my house? We don't understand why it's important for you. So there is a lot of explaining, and explaining why I think it's important where they live in, and so that's my surprise is the main reaction I get.
For me, the reaction, I guess sometimes you just have to be persistent, because I guess you get the person's number if you do it by Google, like where you're saying like technology changes, but you can get so far. I mean, people are not really open to just answering questions, and I think it was very much about, again, the idea of meeting all these people, that they open up and were able to open up to other people to actually themselves write emails and tell them, this person's doing this is really interesting. So by that, I mean, that's why I keep calling it like kind of a more personal network of how everything came about, right? Because at some point I ended up in the preservation department in Brazil with the director of preservation from another person who was a historian of very specific buildings in Brasilia, or like, so I think at the end of the day, the generosity, I think the project happens because of the generosity of this network that you're able to accomplish.
I think I have one more question.
I'm questioning how the fellowship could sort of go beyond the lecture and get to a larger community. When I Googled the Druker Fellowship, I got 4 pages of small paragraphs about what each one had done. And I was wondering if, as part of this thing going further, that there could be like a 3-page summary of those, Carlos starts it or maybe the others, that would be a link to what has happened for this site, so that there
No, I think that that's actually a very important point, and I think sort of part of creating this new archive, but also allowing for the projects to take other mediums than just a lecture publications. I think the idea, for example, of the exhibition that's actually traveling back to every single campus is an interesting way to be able to expand and actually make this incredible set of experiences, right, travel experiences and research, be available for a much larger audience. So I think in general that is a very clear agenda. But maybe
I think we, I mean, I think
Yeah, I think we all see
Yeah.
the result of this will be a publication. That's for sure. Yeah, it's a thing. And also, in my case, I'm trying to publish some articles on each one of or some of the most interesting cases. I published one on the Canada, one in India. So that's
right.
yeah.
Right.
And I think also the presence in the internet, of how you just described
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
as at least for us, because I know you did it, and I mean, I have a page which actually has all the research there and the pictures and everything, and you can go in and you can actually just Google it and it comes up. So I'm very conscious, I think, myself of that need to kind of distribute this knowledge that I was able to accomplish.
Very good. I think with that, we'll ask Moisen to please give us the closing comments. Thank you very much.
So first of all, can I have one of these fellowships, do you think? I mean, it's
You'll have to apply.
I'm sure. I'm not sure that I'll get one, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, first of all, it's really wonderful to come back and sit in the front row and hear these amazing former students make presentations. You all sound so incredibly convincing, I must say. It's really wonderful. I have been with a lot of others sitting in 2 days of our visiting committee here, so unfortunately I missed the first panel, which sounds wonderful, but I have gone through the book and looked at the presentations, and now, of course, hearing comments. It sounds as if that must have also been an incredible opportunity. Hearing Carlos whistle after those 2 days, I must say I had completely forgotten about whistling, and it's so nice. It's so nice to just hear somebody do that. I think it's an incredible form of relief, which when you sit in 2 days of those meetings, I tell you, you don't get to whistle. They whistle and we jump. So it was really exciting to hear these presentations, and as I said, to sort of look at them in the context of the previous things. What really struck me is the manner in which this concept of the notion of sort of comparative methods is such a big part of what you are all doing. In a way, I mean, what Ron has enabled so many people to do, 26 instances of really a kind of contemporary reconstruction of the Grand Tour, and really sending people to all places around the world, and to really see the notion of being on site, traveling, and understanding the differences between places as part of a form of, as a mode of gaining knowledge, of understanding things. So I think this is the Druker Grand Tour Fellowship, which I think is fantastically interesting. But it's actually looking at the difference, for example, on the comparisons of the different campus plans, which is about certain level of similarity of ideas, but actually executed in different way, under different circumstances in different locations, to looking at the Bata factories where the family have similar intentions, but actually the realization of those intentions under different contexts produces a whole variety of different conditions, social conditions. In other words, typologically, there may be a similarity, but actually in terms of social impact, it's very different. It would be wonderful to get more of a sense even of what is what is the consequence of the same kind of architecture in different places in terms of the kind of social lives that it produces. And with Loretta, the question of water and the understanding of these alternative methods in different places. What's clear, hearing all of you speak and then reading also something about the earlier presentations, and by the way, looking through this and noticing some of the names of people also, especially from the mid-1990s and so on, who were doing very exciting things. I think it's very clear, this sense of now there is, in a way, a very clear, the word archive has been mentioned, but really a clear set of documents about the world, about the manner or alternative ways that we look at urbanization across the globe. And we now have this document, which is really part of what Ron's point is, that we actually have the responsibility to make sure that we can actually document this material to be able to have access to it, either in one grand tome of the mega grand tour, or actually now probably in terms of a kind of digital archive of being able to see the outcome of all this work. When you look at the earlier generation of these projects, what's interesting is the manner in which this period of travel and investigation has played such a significant part in the lives of so many of the people who were the recipient of the fellowship. And they went on to do lots and lots of things that somehow were influenced. I'm sure on part this is because you had that interest, but on the other hand, it seems that the months of travel actually confirms, reaffirms that interest, and then links it to what people have gone on to do subsequently. So I think it's really an incredible opportunity, thanks to Ron, for us to be able to have this award. And I am very grateful to Rahul and Felipe for organizing this. I know Alex has been a big part of this. I know Andrea has been a part of this, and many, many others. So really, congratulations to all of you, and many thanks again to Ron for giving us this gift. May it continue for a very long time. I know Ron would like to say a word, so I'm going to pass the baton on to Ron.
Was the interpersonal aspect of it, because any of us who've ever traveled, and especially when you travel when you're younger, you meet a lot of interesting people in different places, in different ways, and in many ways that are completely unexpected. And I'm going to be out of the country with a friend of mine whom I traveled with in 1965. And in 65, we were in Yugoslavia, and we were in East Berlin, and we were in Istanbul, and we were in a bunch of places where no one went in those days. And we were in Munich, where they were under construction for the '72 Olympics, and at the same time, there was still rubble from the Second World War, as there was in Berlin. So you don't forget that, and you don't forget meeting people in sporting goods shops who dated a girl that you knew from Boston, and just that kind of thing.
Say more.
But I just think what's interesting is that we all benefit from travel, and I cannot tell you how pleased I am to have played a small part in the growth of 25, 26 people, and I hope I'm here for the 50th.
Yeah.